You keep leaving your hardest problems for someone else to solve. That's probably true. But here's the mistake. You think you're postponing them until tomorrow. You're not. You're making a promise to a person you've never actually met. Think about the things you tell yourself. I'll start next week. I'll deal with it tomorrow. After this busy month, I'll finally become disciplined. You say these things so often, they stop sounding strange. But they are. Because every time you postpone something, you quietly assume that the version of you waking up tomorrow will somehow be better equipped than the version sitting here today. Why? Where did that confidence come from? Because if today's version of you doesn't feel like doing the work, what makes tomorrow's version so different? The strange thing is, most people never question that assumption. They simply trust it. They imagine future me as someone with more energy, more discipline, more motivation, more clarity, almost like another person. And that's where something interesting begins. Not because your future self is lazy, not because you're lazy, because your brain has quietly separated one person into two. There's the version of you that gets to enjoy today. And there's the version of you that gets to deal with the consequences. The uncomfortable conversation? Tomorrow. The difficult workout? Tomorrow. The project you've been avoiding? Tomorrow. The decision you've been delaying? Tomorrow. Notice something strange. You almost never postpone comfort. You postpone responsibility. Nobody says, I'll relax next month instead. I'll scroll social media in 2 weeks. I'll watch this show next year. Comfort happens now. Responsibility belongs to future you. Without realizing it, your brain starts treating time like a way to outsource difficult emotions. Except there's one problem. Tomorrow has a strange habit of becoming today. And every time it does, the person you've been waiting for looks surprisingly familiar. It's you, just a little older, with the same doubts, the same habits, the same unfinished tasks, the same conversations you've been avoiding. Nothing magical happened overnight, because tomorrow never creates a new person. It only creates another today. That's why this cycle feels so endless. Every evening, future you seems incredibly capable. Tomorrow morning, today's you feels exactly the same as yesterday. So the promises continue. Maybe next Monday, after vacation, when work becomes less stressful, when life calms down, the date changes. The story doesn't. The strange part is, your brain isn't being irrational. In fact, it's doing something surprisingly understandable. The future is impossible to experience, which means it's also impossible to disappoint. As long as something stays in the future, it stays perfect. Your future self never gets tired, never gets distracted, never feels anxious, never has a bad day, because that person exists only inside your imagination. Reality hasn't had a chance to interfere yet. Think about how often people describe the future version of themselves. I'll be healthier. I'll be more confident. I'll finally have my life together. Notice something. They're not describing tomorrow. They're describing someone they'd like to become. And without realizing it, they begin expecting that person to appear automatically, simply because time has passed. But time doesn't build character by itself. It doesn't create discipline. It doesn't make difficult choices easier. It only gives those choices another date. Maybe that's why the future always feels so generous. It happily accepts every responsibility because it never has to carry it. Not yet. There's another reason this illusion is so powerful. When you imagine future you, you're usually imagining a version of yourself without today's emotions. Not tired, not overwhelmed, not frustrated, not distracted. You imagine making the same decision under perfect conditions. But life rarely offers perfect conditions. When tomorrow finally arrives, it brings new emails, new problems, new interruptions, new reasons to wait another day. Reality replaces imagination, just like it always does. That's why future you keeps disappointing you. Not because that version fails, because that version never actually existed. There was never a separate person waiting to rescue your plans. There was only today's version of you, passing responsibility to tomorrow's version, over and over again. Eventually, something strange happens. You stop noticing the handoff. It becomes automatic. Every difficult decision quietly slides a little further into the future. Not forever, just one more day. And that's exactly why years can disappear, without feeling dramatic. Not because you consciously gave up, because every delay felt completely reasonable. Tomorrow always seemed close enough to borrow from, until one day you look back and realize you've been trusting someone who never once had the chance to be different. Maybe that's the real trap. Not believing that tomorrow exists. Of course it does. The trap is believing that tomorrow automatically creates a better version of you, because tomorrow doesn't arrive with a new personality. It arrives with yesterday's habits. Maybe that's why the future always feels so full of possibility. Not because it contains more time, because it contains more imagination. You can imagine future you doing anything. Starting the business, writing the book, losing the weight, changing your life. Fantasy has no deadlines, no exhaustion, no laundry waiting in the corner. Reality does. And reality is where every future version of you eventually has to live. Maybe your future self isn't failing you. Maybe you've been asking an imaginary person to solve problems that only today's version of you will ever get the chance to face. Because the strange thing about the future is that it never arrives as the future. It always arrives as today. And by then, the person you've been waiting for has quietly become you.